Well, hello and Merry Christmas to everyone, or Merry Christmas Eve, or whatever day you happen to be watching this. I'm doing this for Christmas. I'm actually inside my truck right now. The reason being, as you can see, or maybe you can see at this, I can't adjust the camera a whole lot here, but you can see I've got a coat on, I've got two shirts on. It is very cold outside. It is, the sun is shining, fortunately. But it is still very, very cold, very much below freezing outside. So I'm up in the area where I do a lot of walking, a lot of hiking, where I've done a lot of videos before. Look at that. This is actually the reflection of the sun off of this on my Bible here. It's actually interesting look. Yeah, I'm in an area where I do a lot of walking and hiking at, but you can't stay out in this more than just a few minutes. I may go out here in just a little bit just to show you some of it where I don't have to be out for very long. But to do anything very long out there, your face would be freezing, and even in here, it's kind of cold. But at least I'm protected from the wind, and it's holding in. Where I'm at here, it holds in some of the heat. So I want to read to you from the Gospel of Matthew. And this is the story of the wise men and of Herod. You're probably familiar with it. Most people know the story pretty well of what happened at Christmas time, or at the birth of Jesus, what we now celebrate as Christmas. But this is what I want to read, is in Matthew chapter 2, and beginning in verse 1. And it says, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah. For out of thee shall come a governor, that shall rule my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, Go and search diligently for the young child. And when you have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. When they had heard the king, they departed. And lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. When they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, and frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, In Ramah there was a voice heard, lamentation and weeping, and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted, because they were not." This account most people know about at the time of Jesus' birth, or perhaps 2 years afterwards. It's kind of hard to be exactly sure exactly how old Jesus was at this point, but We can sort of guess from what happened with Herod afterwards. He was no older than 2, but he had all of the young children killed, so he knew that was sort of, Jesus had to be no older than 2 years old, but obviously could have been still a newborn. But we see the responses to the birth of Jesus and to the announcement that the Christ had been born, and you can see the different responses to it. The one response we can see is obviously the one I've mentioned here quite a bit, is Herod. And in Herod's response, what we have is, how's the best way to say this? It is a very violent rejection, very active rejection. And you can see Herod was, the idea no one was going to be king but him. He'd heard this message that, that the wise men come asking, where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? King of the Jews. Herod thinks, that's me. I'm the King of the Jews. And nobody's going to take my throne from me. And it says all of Jerusalem was troubled with him. And there's an old saying, if Herod was troubled, everybody was troubled. Because there was because Herod was a very violent person. He was known to even kill his own family members that he thought were a threat to him. So this was, things were well known of Herod. This incident is not recorded outside of the Bible, but everyone pretty well agrees it sounds like something Herod would have done. And even Caesar Augustus had once said that he would rather be Herod's dog than Herod's son, because he would not have killed his dog, but he was very possible that he could have killed his son, because that was just the way he was. He was very suspicious of everyone. But his attitude here is that someone was going to take the throne of Jerusalem and be the king of the Jews, and there was a threat. So he has to eliminate that threat. You can see that response still people have to Jesus, is that they're going to be in charge, they're going to be the king of their own lives, they're going to rule their own lives, and no one is going to tell them what to do. No God is going to tell them especially what to do. They may or may not believe in God, but the idea is it doesn't matter. He's not going to tell them what to do. They're going to live their own life. They're going to be in charge. And anyone who tries to take over the throne of their life, anyone who wants to rule them, well, they can be done away with. They're not going to have that. The idea is they rule it themselves. So there was that response from Herod, and I say that response is still there. It's still there in the hearts of man. If we went back to the beginning of the Old Testament, we would find the original sin of our forefathers, that are of our original parents, I guess I should say. You will be like God. If you eat this. You eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that you will be just like God, and you'll rule. You'll have that. That was man's original temptation, and that was why the reason for man's original disobedience was the idea that you will be just like God, and that's still in the heart of man. Not everyone can do what Herod did. Herod had the ability to do things that we wouldn't have the ability to do because of, he was the king. He had that power to be able to do it. But it is still in the attitude of people. It's still the attitude of many. If we could do that, then we probably would, because of that idea of the rejection, that we're not going to have someone ruling over us. So that was Herod's response, and it's still some people's response to the idea that there's another king, that there's someone who has the rightful place to rule as king, and they just reject it. There's a second response to the king, to the announcement of the birth of Jesus, that sometimes gets overlooked, and that's the ones of the religious people in Jerusalem. It says Herod inquired of them, where the Christ was to be born. And they tell him, they said, well, in Bethlehem. And then they quote from the book of Micah, the 5th chapter, the 2nd verse. So these, the religious leaders there in Jerusalem, they knew it, they knew the chapter and verse, as we often say. But you see, they had, it was almost like an academic exercise to them. They knew where Jesus was going to be born, or excuse me, I should say they knew where the Christ was going to be born. They didn't know his name was Jesus, but they knew where the Christ was going to be born. They knew where the Messiah was going to be born. But that seemingly has no effect on them as they hear this message. They hear that the Messiah has been born. These strangers from, we don't know where they were from, Babylon, Persia, somewhere in there. They were from the east. And they had come to and said, well, they calculated that the King of the Jews has been born. They've seen his star. And so, Herod finds out from them where the Christ is to be born at. They knew the scriptures real well. They knew it better than most. They could point you right to it. Herod came and asked them. They didn't say, well, we'll have to go research that. They just, told him. Said, well, we can tell you exactly where the Christ is going to be born at. It's going to be born in Bethlehem. And they said, here's the verse to prove it. So they knew it very well. But it has absolutely no effect on them. They knew the truth. And they knew it, as I say, better than many of the other people, the common people that lived in Jerusalem at that time. But it had no effect on them. And that's the second response to it, is what I'm going to call, if I call it Herod's response, sort of a violent rejection. You have the religious leaders there in Jerusalem, what we can call, for lack of a better way of saying it, religious indifference. They know the truth, but it doesn't affect them at all. They just sort of ignore it. There's a lot of people the same way. They could quote exactly with what I just read this morning. They could tell you that story with no problem, as well as the rest of the story. They could tell you far more than what the religious leaders of that time told Herod. They could tell you everything about Jesus, about his life, death, resurrection, the whole thing. But it doesn't affect them. Has had no effect on them either. And that's, for some people, that's the response they have. They know a lot of the things about Jesus. They know it backwards and forwards, the chapter and verse, as I say, but it has no effect on them. Maybe that's your response to Jesus as well. Maybe it's, it didn't really, you just kind of go about life. It doesn't, the truth, you've heard the truth, but it doesn't affect you. And that's some people's response. But then the last response, we have the sacrificial worship of the wise men. Consider they came from a long distance. I mean, even by today's means of travel, that would be a long distance, but by their means of travel, it was a much longer distance and in a long time that it would have taken them to come. But they find out the king has been born in they don't know where he's been born at. They just know he's been born. The King of the Jews has been born, and so they come to worship him. They give up their time. We know it may have been, well over a year that they had been traveling. We don't know how long exactly they had gone, but nevertheless, they'd spent a lot of time. And the Bible also says, of course, that they gave of their treasures, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These were not cheap 5 and dime type items that you bought at the dollar store. These were expensive gifts that they would have had to have given Jesus. And so they, have sacrificed their treasure as well as their time to come see him. And when they come, they go into a house. We don't know. If this was in Bethlehem, this was probably fairly modest, maybe even lower than modest. This was just because Bethlehem was just a common town. It wasn't the big ritzy place where all the rich folks lived. It was just your average common folks that lived there, and they walk into this house, which is where the star shows this is where he's born at. There's nothing other than that to signify that there was anything special about it. And they go in there, and it says they fall on their knees and worship him. It says they get down and worship him. They bow down before him. A little child, and how old he was, we can say anywhere from being a newborn to 2 years old, but nevertheless, a very young kid who's living just in the house of commoners, and just something that wouldn't make him stand out any more than anything else would. But they fall down and worship him. And as I said, they bring him gifts. They recognize who he is, and it affects them. They give up of their time, they give up of their treasures, and they fall down and worship him. That's the correct response to Jesus. And considering the fact that we know far more than what they know. As I said a minute ago, we know about his, not just his birth here in this story, but we know about his life, the ministry he had, the miracles, all of that. And we know all of those things that he did. And of course, we know of his death and resurrection as well. So knowing all that, our response should be one of even greater than that of the wise men. It's also worth noting they were obedient to God, and he told them to leave, not to go back to Herod, to go another way. They did that. This was the wise men. Now, some people, said they call them the Magi, and they were wise in the way of probably of the astrological studies and so forth. But there's a saying you'll see sometimes today. You'll see a picture like of something with the wise men. We don't know how many there were either. We commonly say there were 3 because there were 3 gifts, but there may have been far more than 3. But however many of them there were, but you'll see the picture of them, or an artist drawing of them, and it'll say something like this: "Wise men still seek him." And I would just go even further: wise men still worship him. Wise men still serve him. So that was their response, and be a wise person. Help us to be just as wise as they were, to worship and adore the King of the Jews, to worship, serve him, and recognize him for whom he is. No greater gift can we have at Christmas than to do that, and to have Jesus appear to us as the King, and our response to him to be one of worship and one of being humble before him. So with that, I'll say Merry Christmas to everyone. I hope everyone has a blessed Christmas and remembers the real meaning of it. Now, as I said, I will move the camera here. I'll turn this around a bit so you can see. I'm inside. As I said, I'm inside my truck, and it's not all that warm in here, but it's a little bit warmer than it is on the outside. Grab my keys here, and I'm going to go out for just a few minutes here. Yeah, I can already feel the difference as soon as I open the door. Fortunately, I am in the kind of a sunny area, so you can see a little bit of this around here. There were some areas. Now, let me show you the back of my truck here. That's ice. This has frozen